Back in early September, I posted a video of an early attempt at doing a kaleidoscope pull-through swirl in a cylindrical mold. I've made several batches since then and am perfecting my technique, getting a little more symmetry to the pattern, and am better able to figure out when the soap is ready to be poured. I also um, at someone else's recommendation early on, tried pouring through a funnel, but I've found a way that works well for me is if the soap is at the right level of thickness, you can pour it down that stem or that handle that allows you to pull the swirling tool out, and it will kind of stick to that. I learned that as an undergraduate chemistry student, that if you wanted to decant something cleanly out of a beaker, you just had to put a glass rod against it and it would follow the rod. Well, it does the same thing with that metal rod. So since then, I've made several batches with the original swirling tool that I got from Belinda Williams at Love Your Suds, and I'll put links to these places down below. But since then, I've also got several new swirling tools from Wild Plantanica. And so I'm going to use one of those today and make a black and white soap using a snowflake pattern. I think it would be really cool if you could have an all white snowflake on a black background. It's not going to do that. It's going to be a mixture, but the pattern should be a snowflake. Here's the recipe that I plan to use. I've also practiced a little with increasing and decreasing the size of the recipe, and a 32-ounce recipe just about fills the cylindrical mold from Essential Depot, which is the mold I use. And so this recipe I found also will thicken enough to be poured in a reasonable amount of time with just hand whisking. And yet it does not thicken up too much during the time it takes to pour the entire mold. So I'm liking this recipe as well. It's things that I often use: castor oil, coconut oil, lard, shea butter, sunflower oil, and tallow. I've tried it without the shea butter, and there's so much lard, tallow, and sunflower there that it really becomes very, very slow to develop some viscosity. And one thing I've found is it pours best. You don't want it really at what I would call trace, but you want it a little beyond emulsion, where you're definitely feeling a little bit of resistance as you're whisking it. It's starting to thicken up just slightly, and at that point, it pours really well. I'm going to be using Dragon's Blood fragrance from Nature's Garden, and since it discolors to a fairly dark tannish brown, I'm going to use it only in the black batter, and I'm going to leave the white batter completely unscented. This is the mold that I'm going to be using today from Wild Plantanica, and it is supposed to be a snowflake pattern. As usual, I have the sugar and the sodium lactate pre-dissolved in the lye water. My lye water is at about 114 degrees Fahrenheit. My oils are a little below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And I have pre-moistened my coloring agents with a little bit of the soft oils before I mixed in the hard oils. And then I have my fragrance oil separate here so it can go only into the black batter. So I said earlier, I like this recipe in that it will thicken up enough without too much exhausting whisking, and yet it will stay adequately liquid until the column is completely poured. I just want to get this well emulsified, and I'll put it into the two colors and then keep whisking them until they thicken a bit. try to scrape up that color from the bottom. And I'm going to put the fragrance into the black batter. I'm going to try to aim my camera so you can actually see the batter going into the bottom of the mold. I don't know how well that may work. Now, the method that I've found has worked well for me, as I said, is to pour down the column. And so I pour with my right hand, and using my left index finger, I try to hold that column as vertically and in the center of the mold as I can. I'm realizing by doing that my camera is going to probably try to focus on my fingers, so this may not be totally in focus. But what I'm going to do then is, using this spouted pitcher, I'm going to pour the liquid right down the steel column. Using probably 2 or 3 tablespoons on each pour. I wonder, can you see that? Yeah, you can kind of see how that's doing. I've still not perfected getting it to be really symmetrical. I think if I had a smaller table, if I actually walked around the table while I poured, that might do it, because it does seem to go down more on one side of the column than the other. Again, I don't know how well you can see that with my finger in the way, but it really follows the column very neatly. I like to try for at least 20 color cycles. So black-white would be 1 cycle. This mold makes 10 1-inch bars, and so by doing that you end up with black-white in each bar theoretically. Of course it's going to stir up and down, but you end up with that many stripes, and I think that allows you to see good striping on both sides of every piece of soap. And I've not been counting here, so I'm not sure how many cycles I've done so far. The batter is probably at a very light trace right now, which is a bit thicker than it was when I started, and I think it is pouring more cleanly now. Even though this is a pretty good recipe to work with and that it doesn't harden too fast, at this point you really don't dare waste time, or it will thicken up on you. Now there you can kind of see how it's striping. And as often happens when you're using different types of colorants, the black with the charcoal is thickening noticeably faster than the white that's colored with mica. If I were using titanium dioxide for the white, it would tend to thicken faster. But these are still nicely liquid and easily pourable. This will be the last of the white. And we'll finish up the black here. And as you can see, a 32-ounce batch just about exactly fills that mold. Now, I think I'm going to have to move the camera a little in order to get that shaft past it. Let me adjust this a bit. I'll try to lift that straight out slowly. Now, I will put the lid on that and let it cure overnight. As I've said before, I have access to an oven that I can set at 55 Celsius, which is a little cooler than most home ovens will go. I would like for it to gel, but I don't want it to develop those silicone bubbles that you sometimes get at 77 Celsius or 170 Fahrenheit. And we'll have a look at this tomorrow. The soap is a day old, and so it's ready to be unmolded. I think this is a cylindrical mold from Essential Depot. The last video I did of a soap like this, somebody asked why I didn't just open the mold to take the soap out. Actually, it doesn't open. These are ridges on the side of the silicone that allow you to put some pressure on it to loosen the soap, but it's a continuous cylinder. And so by leaning this one against the floor and then pushing away from myself with this one, you can kind of break the seal. And by the way, I've had this this batch of soap in the refrigerator for a few hours, so it's quite cool below room temperature. And as you do that, you can see it just breaking loose. That works quite nicely. I do think with this mold, I'm glad I used the sodium lactate. I don't think it would be as easy to get out if I didn't do that. And then I've discovered that a 4-ounce jar that you get micas or clays in to use as a colorant works very well as a pusher for this size mold. Even with the sodium lactate, it's a little tight to start with, but it is moving. Now it's becoming much easier. And when I've got that one done, I put another jar under it. Just continue. At that point, sometimes you can pull it out by hand. Otherwise, I put a third jar under it. Now it should pull right out. So there is the finished soap. I always like the sides on these. They're so shiny and an interesting stripe to it. And then, as I've said before, I tend to cut these with a cheese slicer. I keep threatening to buy a real soap cutter for a log type mold, but I haven't done it. Cut the end off. Well, I think that's quite pretty. It's nothing like a snowflake, but interesting, complicated pattern. I am glad to see that the Dragon's Blood fragrance, which discolors, does not seem to have migrated at all into the white area. So, I like that one rather a lot. I think this one is pretty nice. And then some somewhat stranger looking bars. Still not unhappy with them. I think that one is beautiful. I really like that. So here are perhaps the my least favorite bar on the left and my most favorite on top from this particular pull-through tool. I'm finding with these tools that while there is some variation in the pattern in the finish, so it's not as much as you might think. And so, for example, this one doesn't really look like a snowflake, even though it could be pretty. This is the original tool that I did my first video about the method way back. This one being from Belinda Williams at Love Your Suds. And it makes a very nice kaleidoscope type pattern. I like it. I would say it's one of my 3 favorites, possibly. And then the other ones I've used are all from Wild Plantanica. I like them all, but some I do like better than others. And as I say, I don't see a lot of extreme variation between them. So this one I did recently, kind of like that. You can see I've got some glycerin rivers there, which is unfortunate. That's not the fault of the tool at all, certainly. This is one of my favorites. I especially like the little, almost like a sunflower there in the middle of that one. And who knows how much of that is due to the pull-through tool itself and how much of it was that I happened to get a more symmetrical pour of my colors. I like this one a lot too. This one may be my absolute favorite. I just really like the look of that design.